Welcome back, everybody. In our next session, we will talk about role-based access control. I'm going to explain what RBAC is and how it works. And then we will talk about some of the RBAC best practices and look at an example. We're going to show you how to implement role-based access control on a Palo Alto Networks firewall. What is role-based access control, abbreviated as RBAC? Okay, so RBAC is a tool that allows us to restrict access to the system, administrative access to the system, with the aid of so-called roles. And you can think of a role as of a collection of privileges or basically authorization rights that you will give to the connected admin or system. So this way you can control what functionality the administrator is going to have on the system, what elements is he gonna access, and what type of configurations he or she can perform. So it doesn't have to be very broad, like read access versus read and write access. It can be much more specific, where you will tell exactly what part of the GUI or maybe what commands an admin is supposed to access. Okay, the role-based access control implementation should follow, per best practices, should follow the principle of least privilege, which is, again, the least amount of access rights, or basically the lowest level of access required by an entity to perform its functions, its job, tasks, its job role. And now the implementation of RBAC based on that principle of least privilege is gonna definitely involve the control of the administrator accounts, or basically people who get administrator account, people and services to manage our systems. And once we designate administrators and our tools, services for API access, we will also have to think about controlling the privileges, controlling the roles, which is going to be performed with the aid of so-called admin role profiles. So the idea here is that we generally want to limit access not just to the authorization rights or just permissions, the privileges on the system, but we also want to manage access to individual systems our admin is going to be able to get to. So for instance, if you have an admin that is supposed to control the firewall systems in just one location, you don't necessarily want to give him access to firewalls in other locations. So you want to narrow down the scope of access and the privileges even for the administrators as much as possible. Now, talking about the best practices for implementation, we ideally want to deploy a secure, centralized authentication mechanism, such as use Active Directory, maybe Radius. We want to couple that with a password generation tool, a so-called password manager, and ideally we also want to deploy more than one authentication method, which means use multi-factor authentication, MFA, which is how we can enforce authentication at different levels, like with passwords, with biometrics, or maybe something that the user has, like a token, like SMS, text message to the phone, and so on. I'm going to quickly show you how to configure just a place in the GUI, because this session, as all other videos in this course, are not actually meant to teach you all configuration building blocks from the ground up. So we will just quickly look at the place in the GUI where you could configure authentication profile. And authentication profile is where you define the authentication method you want to use for the user. And it's also where you can configure the address of the services and other settings associated with centralized external AAA devices. So this would be a Radius profile. If this was a Radius server, what you would need to add in addition to building the authentication profile. Okay, another thing that we want to pay attention to is going to be obviously the admin accounts. So as I said, we want to limit the number of admin accounts to the lowest number possible. And we want to create a dedicated admin account for each of the users and the services/tools that we have in the network that require access to our firewalls. So this means that you never want to share an admin account among more than among two or more users. You don't want to use shared accounts because when something bad happens, it's going to be pretty much impossible to track down who of the admins made the change. You will not be able to prove whose fault it was, or basically who caused some issues with the config. So you wanna use one account, one admin account per user per service. Plus, you want to create one fallback account, a local super user account, which is an account with all access rights, read-write to all configuration settings. And this account is supposed to be kept secret. You want to maintain the credentials to this account in a secure location. This account is needed in case you lose access, remote access to the external services. You cannot use external services for authentication. Then you need to fall back to this local account. Also note that the default admin account should be deleted. So once you create a local super user account, use a different name than admin because admin is well known, and it's pretty easy to guess this account name for everyone. Okay, so administrators, this is something that we would do. We would add under the device tab, a device, and then administrators. Maybe we will add an admin account in just a moment. But notice that this is where you can attach an authentication profile. And other than that, you can specify a password and select the admin type, dynamic versus role-based. In our case, it is going to be role-based. The dynamic admin type is a predefined set of rights based on these four settings. It's pretty much access to everything or almost everything, read-write or just read access. It's not role-based access really, so it's out of the scope of this session. We will focus on role-based access. Okay, so once we configure the admin accounts and the authentication server, or basically selected the authentication method, it's a good moment to configure our role profiles for administrators. Okay, so as I mentioned, the idea is that we want to provide minimum amount of privileges, just the minimal access to those individuals, maybe groups of administrators if they are supposed to share the same privileges, like maybe you have a group of security operation admins and each of them is supposed to have the same rights. In that case, it would be sufficient to come up with just one admin role profile and assign this profile to more than one admin account. The same applies to other concepts, like when you want to perform that breakdown based on departments, maybe locations, or maybe a collection of internal tools that should obtain access through API. Let's also take a look at the documentation for the GUI access. Maybe let's look at this. Let's just go back to the main documentation page. And the documentation, the document I want to show you, it should be under administration 11.0 in my case. And then firewall administration, I believe. Reference web interface administrator access. Okay, so this is basically a breakdown on all of the different options that you can control with role profiles. Maybe let's start with define access to the web interface. Let's take a look at one of the granular options, the breakdown for individual tabs. So as you can tell, we have the ability to specify what type of access we want to provide to each of the main tabs, configuration tabs of our system. So we've got dashboard, application command center, monitor, policies, objects, network, and device. We look at the documentation. The breakdown is exactly the same from dashboard down to device. And we can either disable, enable access to these tabs. You can't make them read-only, so we either give access to the tab or not. But what you can do is that you can provide specific changes to the sub-options available within each of those, and most of those menus, main tabs. So for instance, if I were to, let's say, if I were to limit access to the objects menu, I should be able to do that using this document as a reference. So it basically explains what a given menu option is, what it does, and what you can do for it. Okay, just to make it clear, enable is read-write access, and this is read-only, and this is like when you wanna skip, you don't want to give access to a given configuration element. So read-write, read, or no access. This is how you should read it. Okay, some other elements you can configure outside of those menus is going to be access to the commit and validate functions to the panorama tab, operations settings, global settings, and commit and validate. I believe this is also for saving. Yeah, for save. The ability of saving the config. Right, so maybe let's quickly take a look at this. Let's go ahead and create an admin account. I'm going to go to device administrators. Let's create a custom admin account, net admin. Before I build this account, okay, let's create this net admin, give it a password. And let's now go to device admin roles. And let's try to implement RBAC for this administrator. Okay, so idea is gonna be, I'm gonna call the profile net admins. And the idea is that we wanna give just the basic functionality for this administrator. We wanna focus on the networking tab. Like if we have a bunch of administrators there that are supposed to manage the network related configuration of our firewalls. So I'm gonna disable access to ACC. I'm gonna leave dashboard on. I'm gonna leave access to the monitor window, but I'm gonna disable most of the options. We will just leave the X. Red X means you wanna disable. The log, orange log is read only, and the green OK, the tick is enable. So we will leave packet capture to on. We will leave all of the logs, disable reports, and then we will disable access to policies. For objects, let's just leave addresses, address groups, and maybe applications and application groups. So we can easily tell, you know, what config is here, what options are on, what options are off for the user when we eventually test this. I'm gonna disable most of these. Under the objects, so we leave addresses, applications, and services, and then network, I'm gonna leave everything here. Device is off, same as operations, privacy. Okay, validate, save, and commit, and tasks. This is what I want to leave enabled. So once again, we've got the dashboard on. The monitor is on, but just for the logs and packet capture. And then objects is on for addresses, groups, application groups, service groups. Then we've got the network tab on, and validation, save, and commit. Then for the command line, we will say that this user is supposed to get read access to the system, XML is going to be off, and REST API is going to be off as well. So remember about these APIs. This is for your scripts, internal tools, in-house applications that get access via an API. Okay, so this is my profile. And now the profile is supposed to be associated with my admin. So we'll go back to the netadmin, and I'm gonna choose a role-based as the admin type for my netadmin, where I'm gonna select my netadmin's profile. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a commit. And maybe in the meantime, I'm gonna open up the command line. Technically, it's gonna be a console. We will start with a quick check on the CLI. It's supposed to be something that we can easily check just by looking at the commands available at the configuration mode. Okay, so let's go back. Let's authenticate as netadmin. So on a question mark in the operations mode, I've got regular commands. I can do ping, I can do traceroute, TCP dump, and so on. Now when I say configure, I question mark, we see that the only thing I can access here is a bunch of regular non-configuration commands. I can do some shows, I can use stop, find, exit, checkup, stuff like that. So I can pretty much use a bunch of show commands in the global config mode because I said I want to give it a super use of read access. So this is for read access only. I can do operations, I can see the config. Okay, so this is working fine. Let's now log out from this admin account. So another thing we want to take a look at is going to be the GUI. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the system, and we will authenticate as netadmin and see what's going to be the difference comparing to the admin account. So our expectation is to see just a few of the tabs, few of the main tabs, objects having the limited functionality, plus we should be able to commit, save config, and validate. Okay, so we can definitely tell that this whole menu is now different. We have access to 4 menu tabs, main menu tabs, instead of 7 or 8, as normally when you get full access. And if we now take a look at, let's start with monitor. So monitor is only giving us access to the log messages because this is what we configured for the user. If we take a look at the Objects tab, we've got applications, addresses, and services, along with groups, exactly as we told it to restrict. And outer network, we can access everything. Plus, if we were to make a change, like let's say add a zone, say layer 3, DMZ, add the zone. Okay, we see that I can commit. I can commit, I can validate. So everything is working fine. We will also, I'm going to revert this change. I don't want to add the zone. So this way we restricted access for the netadmin user. We only gave it access based on its functions, based on its job role. So as you can tell, it's pretty easy to control access on Palo Alto Networks firewalls. The RBAC is pretty easy to implement on this system. Okay, now additional note for Panorama. Panorama is also where you wanna, in addition to using those different profiles for admins, this is also where you wanna restrict access based on so-called access domains, which is the ability of selecting device groups and templates for the user. Okay, one additional thing we want to perform as we implement RBAC is going to be to harden the admin accounts. And we can do this by enforcing certain authentication settings on the system. So we can specify idle timeout, which is how long the system is going to wait before shutting down the admin session, closing down the admin session if no activity is present on the system. So when someone left her PC, is not using it, and there is no activity in the session, so this is going to cause a logout when the timer expires. Okay, we can specify a number of failed attempts, which is basically a number of unsuccessful authentications, which is going to cause the system to hold subsequent authentications for this amount of minutes, the lockout time. Like if I say 20 minutes here for the lockout, it means that when I fail authentication once, the second time, and the third time, another authentication prompt I'm gonna get is gonna be shown after 20 minutes. So you won't see another prompt for 20 minutes with this config after you fail authentication 3 times. We will take a look at that in just a moment. One additional thing is known as activity tracking. So this is one other thing you would want to do when dealing with implementing RBAC. Activity tracking is all about being able to see the changes performed by the administrator at the level of operational commands or at the level of UI, the GUI actions. Like when someone switches a tab, let's say from dashboard to objects, or within the objects from applications to addresses. We will look at that in just a second, but before we get to that, I want to quickly recap on the configuration elements that we have seen in this session. So external authentication, this is authentication profile, where you define the server, external server instance, then admin accounts and admin role profile. So admin account is where you select the role profile and where you assign authentication profile, and then account hardening and activity tracking. We will look at that in just a moment. Let's go ahead and start with account hardening. This is going to be device setup management, authentication sessions. So we want to scroll down to authentication settings. And this is where we can specify our number of failed attempts, the lockout time in minutes, and also idle time for the session. You can disable the timeout. You can use the default number. You can provide your custom number of minutes. So it's pretty simple stuff here. And now in terms of the activity tracking, we would still go to device setup management, but this time you would go to logging and reporting settings, where we would want to switch from log storage to log export and reporting, and focus on this portion, log admin activity. But notice that the log admin activity is represented for a bunch of added syslog messages. So there is no way to see this on the GUI. You will not be able to see these activities when you enable them on the GUI. The only place where you can look at this stuff is going to be your syslog server. But we can take a look at this at least at the level of a packet capture. So let's quickly test this. Let's go ahead and build a syslog server profile. Now let's say that we've got a device on the inside, like 10.1.100. Let's say that we've got a dummy server here on the inside zone. I'm gonna give it this address of 10.1.100. And then we will go back to device setup management, go back to the log settings, log, export and reporting, and let's enable these debug and operational commands, plus maybe let's just stick to UI actions. There's going to be less messages shown. On the capture, I'm going to choose my syslog profile. We will commit. Okay, I'm going to minimize for a second, and I'm going to use the local capture on Ethernet 1/1, which is my inside port. So this is an Ethernet interface. Let's slightly expand this. And let's immediately immediately filter for looking for syslog messages, and then go back to the PC, wait for the commit to finish. Now let's switch to the dashboard tab, and then let's say to objects and applications, and then take a look at syslog stuff. But we don't see any messages here. Okay, we don't see any syslogs here because one thing I forgot to configure is a service route to tell it to send syslog messages out of the data port instead of the management interface. So let's quickly fix this. We need a service route. So we'll go to device, setup, services, service route configuration, where I'm going to customize this setup. We will just look for syslog, and for syslog I'm gonna say use Ethernet 1/1, which is my inside. Okay, so we need another commit. Now let's go back to the dashboard tab. Okay, so let's just wait for it to finish the policy push. Okay, so no messages, no syslog so far. Okay, let's close this window and let's switch to objects, and then from applications to addresses and maybe also services. And then go back and take a look at the display here. Still no lag, so let's do it once again. Dashboard, objects, and addresses. I still don't see anything here. Great, let's go ahead and do this. Let's just go ahead and change the address of the server, syslog server, to a device that actually exists in this segment. Device, syslog, and give it an existing address. 10.1.1 is my inside router. So maybe if the firewall is able to do the resolution layer 3 to layer 2, it's gonna eventually send these syslog messages. Okay, so one more shot. Let's go ahead. Let's go back to the GUI dashboard, objects, and from applications go up to addresses and switch back to dashboard, objects, and services. So now we see the right message. It says that the user admin accessed tab dashboard. User admin accessed tab objects, and user admin accessed node objects addresses. So node is basically a submenu of the main configuration tab.